Welcome back to another episode of Films Unchained. And right here I'm going to talk about a film that we will fix, whether it's the story, acting, or the production, because it sucked. And that is Ridley Scott's 2001 film, Hannibal, the disappointing sequel of Silence of the Lambs, with Sir Anthony Hopkins reprising his role as Hannibal the Cannibal once again, 10 years after Silence of the Lambs. And unfortunately, Jodie Foster did not reprise her role as Clarice Starling. Instead, it went to Julianne Moore. We also have the late Ray Liotta as Krendler, and Mason Verger played by Gary Oldman. For a film with great actors and a legendary director, Hannibal sucked. It's got horrible storytelling with great performance by cast and crew. Entertainment Weekly described the film as a bloody mess, hemorrhaging talent and money. And there's so many problems with it. First, you got Clarice Starling. No disrespect to Julianne Moore. She's a great actress as we see her in The Hunger Games Mockingjay Part 1 and 2, Still Alice, Magnolia, and many of them. But I didn't like her as Clarice. It felt off, you know? Other choices to play Clarice included Angelina Jolie, Helen Hunt, Hilary Swank, Ashley Judd, and Cate Blanchett. Apparently Ridley Scott's top choice for the role was Moore, and Anthony Hopkins was all in favor having her in the film. Second, you got Mason Verger. If you watched Hannibal the show, Mason Verger was the most hated character in season 2 and 3. He's a child molester, he tortures animals, and he assaults and abuses his sister Margot. Also a very messed up person. He enjoys collecting children's tears to put in his martini. In the show, Mason was played by Michael Pitt in season 2 before replaced by Joe Anderson in season 3. These two did great job in making Mason such a hated character. If Hannibal was Batman, Mason was the Joker. Besides his hideous, scary face and his death in the movie, there was nothing special about him. Ray Liotta played a better hated character than Mason Verger in this film. The script sucked. My third point is that this film could have been perfect to get to know Dr. Lecter's tragedy and his emotional side, such as him having a sister named Misha depicted in the novels and the show itself. As some of you know that Hannibal ate his sister and that was the birth of his cannibalism. And there was so much more to it on why he did this, how did he react to it, how was he able to cope with it, all of that. Where was that? Why didn't they take the opportunity to understand Dr. Lecter's development? They clearly missed their big chance. Ridley Scott's version was cheesy. Like, why would Dr. Lecter say Okey dokey? I can't understand this. The fourth point is that the ending between Clarice and Dr. Lecter. What was that about? Did Clarice get arrested? What did Hannibal do to his hand? And why did he do that? Did he miss when he was trying to amputate Clarice's hand? Did Hannibal have romantic feelings towards Clarice and now he doesn't? How did Lecter get on the plane without people realizing there's a killer on board? And he fed brains to a child. The fifth point is that there was no psychological horror elements. Unlike Silence of the Lambs, they didn't play with people's minds. There were no scenes that kept us on the edge of our seats. It's just a plain crime drama with terrible ending and bad CGI effect. The scene of Hannibal eating Ray Liotta's brain sucked. When they say they try to be open-minded, it shouldn't mean like that. Try to make the scene scarier, a bit more realistic. You gotta try to make every scene more important than the other one. Instead, it was a joke. Story-wise, all that time of Clarice's development in the FBI and her relationship with Hannibal and Silence of the Lambs went to waste. It felt like a bad breakup. They forgot to bring Margot to the story as she's a big part of it. The film missed their opportunity to know more about Hannibal Lecter. He had more screen time than he did in Silence of the Lambs. Thomas Harris' novel of the same name was better than the film, and the show Hannibal with Mads Mikkelsen as Dr. Lecter is 100 times better than this. What sucks is that this was Ridley Scott's first film after his legendary epic Gladiator. He killed his own momentum. For Anthony Hopkins, luckily, this wasn't his last portrayal of Dr. Lecter as he did Red Dragon in 2002, a year after Hannibal. Now, Red Dragon is the prequel to the story of Silence of the Lambs. I enjoyed watching it. They kept the horror vibes, the story was much better, and Dr. Lecter was as creepy as he always is. So overall, the major problem of the film Hannibal was the scripts and the production. But what if I was part of the writing team? In this episode, we're going to rewrite the story and fix Hannibal. First things first, Julian Moore did not have the it factor to play Clarice. So, recommended by my good friend Omar, Clarice will be played by Tilda Swinton. She's great in all the roles that she's been given, and she can turn into the character. Have Tilda as the next Clarice Starling. Second, we will have Margot Verger as she is important to the story. Here, Julianne Moore would be perfect for that role. Third, Ridley Scott will not direct this film. Instead, Hannibal will be directed by Francis Ford Coppola, because he worked with Hopkins and Gary Oldman in his 1994 film Bram Stoker's Dracula, which was the best vampire movie ever. The story in Rome was good for me, so I'll keep it the way it is, like it was in the original film. The kidnap of Pazzi and his execution by Hannibal was spot on. I'll keep the idea of Pazzi being paid by Mason while communicating with Clarice, but I'll take out Hannibal's Okey dokey. What I will write is everything that happened in America. We will rewrite the beginning, the Verger House massacre, and the end. The beginning of the film will be Clarice Starling being evaluated for the same incident that happened in the movie, shooting the criminal. She was about to take an indefinite leave until Krendler decided to give her a chance to redeem her name and reputation. We'll keep Krendler the way he is being corrupted and evil, especially with the way he treats Clarice. He gave her a file that contains pictures of bodies found in Rome, where different organs and body parts were gone. Easily, this was the work of Hannibal Lecter. Krendler said that there was one man who survived from his attack years ago and wanted to meet Clarice. This is where we meet Mason Verger. Clarice met Margot Verger flowering the garden outside of a big mansion. When Clarice asked about her brother, Margot gets flashbacks of her being attacked and tortured by her brother Mason. This briefly introduces Mason's sadistic character. They both walk to Mason's bedroom, where we meet Cordell, who here is more on Mason's side than the one in Ridley Scott's version. He doesn't speak much, as he is the muscles for Mason only. Now, when Clarice met Mason, we don't see his face at all. Instead, he first talked about how he was baptized and has seen the light, regretting his youth hurting people like his sister Margot, and no one was there to guide him. He continued to say that Margot is his only family, and a child he wanted to have. Talk about sadism, man. As for the way he met Lecter, he talked about how he assaulted Margot in the past for her arrogance, which led her to meet Dr. Lecter as her psychiatrist. Mason decided to invite Dr. Lecter to his house to talk about his sister's mental state. Instead, it went to this art of seduction like we briefly saw in Ridley Scott's version. He and Lecter went upstairs for some playtime, with some wine and drugs. Mason had too much to drink, and Lecter drugged Mason with some poppy, leading to cutting his face and got paralyzed from the neck down. And then he began to blame Margot for the incident, saying that if she had been a good sister, Lecter wouldn't do this to him. He started to get angrier, and Margot got uncomfortable. He bragged on how Mason lost his youthful years, could have married a woman, could have had a child to be the heir of the Verger family, the owner of the meatpacking industry. And then we see his face. That should be Mason's first appearance, horrifying the audience. Proper introduction to the character. Mason's horrifying face will still be the same as we saw in Ridley Scott's version and the show. Mason told Clarice that capturing Lecter will only save more people from being eaten by him, and will help Clarice to get back to the FBI, and protecting his own sister, even though he blames her for all of this. She has to end the man who made her Special Agent Starling that we know. The irony of the situation. Mason gave Clarice Dr. Lecter's files and all the information there is to find. Over the next few days, Clarice took time to read everything about Dr. Lecter. She learned about his life, from childhood to his medical practice. Hannibal was born in Lithuania and lived through the horrors of World War II. He lost his parents after a bomb killing them just to look for food. But a sweet, nice information that Clarice took is that Lecter had a sister named Misha, who died at a very young age from natural causes according to the files. This made Clarice curious, questioning why would Lecter hide the fact that he had a sister all along? Was there something that we don't know from young Hannibal? A human side of him, perhaps? Did Hannibal kill his own sister? Now this stopped as we see Krendler wandering around the room. Clarice spooked him with Hannibal's voice on tape, as we saw in the original film, holding the gun after getting spooked. Krendler, realizing it was Clarice, told her that he always has a gun with him at his home and at his cottage. This is important for later. Krendler teases Clarice, calling Lecter her boyfriend, and that the only reason she became a special agent is because they're in love. The criminal helped her to become a hero, really getting under her skin. Now here we're going to transition to Rome, where we see Hannibal Lecter for the very first time since Silence of the Lambs at the opera concert. As I said earlier, the story of Hannibal in Rome stays the same. Podsy will take the matter in his own hands of capturing Lecter without taking Clarice's help, even though she knows what's inside the mind of the cannibal. Mason paid Podsy to capture Lecter in his own hands, but he failed as Lecter put him down, beat him, and tied him up. What's going to change is the phone call between Clarice and Lecter before he killed Podsy like he did in the original film. So when Clarice tried to reach Podsy, Lecter picked up the phone and says something like, "Hello there, Clarice. It's great to hear your voice. How long has it been? 10 years since our last encounter. Past 10 years went to waste. The Special Agent Starling, the Wonder Woman who captured and killed Buffalo Bill. A huge inspiration to all the little girls who want to be like her. A hero. All that time you could have been the woman I thought you'd be and the woman you'd want to be. But you disappointed me, Clarice. You disappointed everyone who believed in you. You disappointed your own father. You disappointed Jack Crawford. Maybe I was wrong about you, Clarice. Maybe the lambs have not been silenced. The FBI has silenced you." Clarice gets angry from Lecter's words, similar to the first time they've met. She gave Dr. Lecter a piece of his own medicine, saying something like, "You haven't changed a bit, Dr. Lecter. Even when you're on the different side of the world, you still feel locked in the cell. You still remember the lambs and the silence. You want to talk about silence? The same way you were silent about Misha, your sister? I couldn't believe it. Hannibal the cannibal had a sister. Tell me, Dr. Lecter, did you eat her as well?" We see Dr. Lecter in shock and weak for the first time. Clarice broke into Dr. Lecter's mind. We then hear voices of a little girl shouting Hannibal's name. That is until he returned to his state of mind. Lecter looked at the wounded Podsy before he returned to the phone call and says, "Clarice, Clarice, Clarice. You must have been doing your homework. Seems like your new friend Mason gave you everything you need to know about me. You and Podsy finding ways to capture me while not being on the same page here. But unlike our boy Podsy, you got guts." This is when Lecter disemboweled Podsy and hung him from the balcony like we saw in the original film. That was the scene, in my opinion, showed what Dr. Lecter is capable of, how sadistic, how evil, how horrifying he can be. The following day, horrified by the news of Podsy's execution after watching the news on live TV, Clarice wanted to end Lecter and his crime by any means necessary, even if it's killing him. She called Krendler and told him, "You want your criminal? You want the cannibal to be captured? You'll get him. Whether dead or alive, I'll take him down. You just do what I say and shut up. Just put me back to where I want to be." Krendler, all happy, laughing, and says, "So what you want, Special Agent Starling?" We move to the scene of Lecter returning to the States with a fedora and a fake goatee, looking like the guy he ate for dinner and stealing his passport. Clarice decided to capture him on her own outside of the airport. But as we always know, Lecter is always 10 steps ahead. He figured that Verger wanted Clarice to capture Lecter. As she was chasing him, Hannibal put Clarice down, trying to choke her, looking at her, and telling her, "I've always expected more from you, Clarice." As he's trying to choke her, with full of disappointment, someone attacked Lecter from behind. Lecter and Clarice were taken away. But by who? None other than Krendler, laughing while seeing both of them down. Clarice got betrayed by Mason Verger with the help of Krendler, showing the corruption of the FBI. Krendler is on Mason's payroll, and they decide to frame Clarice for helping Hannibal Lecter escape to Rome because they're in love. The modern-day Beauty and the Beast lived a life of love, violence, music, and blood. And one day Hannibal returns to America to reunite with his love, until Krendler decided to end them once and for all. This story will put Krendler on the papers as the hero who stopped them for good. And then we jump to the Verger House Massacre, Part 2. We got to see how Lecter is finally captured by Mason with his iconic mask on his head, all tied up and standing on a cross. Mason, with Cordell and Margot, meets Lecter for the first time since their last encounter. He blames Lecter for taking away his ability to walk, his ability to have sex with a woman, his ability to have a child, taking away his looks, taking away his ability to kill him with his own hands. But he says that he will bring a big show for all of us. Mason is going to watch Lecter being eaten by sadistic hogs that he's trained for this very moment. And he will enjoy the show with his spirits up in the air. And he will take Hannibal's head as a souvenir. Lecter, as usual standing still, does not say a word, but stares right through Margot, who looks dissatisfied. And then he looked at Mason and says, "I'm looking forward to the show, young Mason. I enjoy whatever you bring for me. And you know how this is going to end up for both of us." Mason got terrified before Cordell moved Mason away from him, rolling his wheelchair. Margot was left by her brother before going someplace else. She went to check on Clarice, who was bruised up with her arms chained. Here we reveal everything we need to know about Mason. The night he visited Mason at the mansion, Hannibal was saving Margot. We learned that Mason sexually abuses Margot ever since their parents passed away. Whenever she disobeyed her brother, he assaults her and makes her cry, collecting her tears to put in his martini. One incident was that Margot was pregnant with her lover and planned to run away from Mason to Rome until they got captured. Mason got her boyfriend killed by hogs, slaughtering him to death while Margot was forced to watch. And then Mason beat her up to the point of killing the baby, taking from her a chance to become a mother, to be happy for once in her life. And as long as he's still alive, Margot will never see the light of day to have a family and inherit the fortune. Here, the film sealed the hate for Mason Verger. How much more can you hate him now? Hannibal understood what it's like to have a sister who you want to protect and want to make sure she's loved and safe. Mason was the opposite. And this is where Margot helps Clarice. To prepare for the spectacular show, Cordell went to unchain and bring Clarice. That is when, out of nowhere, Clarice bites Cordell's cheek, and then Margot from behind strangles him to death. Margot helped Clarice to escape. Now for the main event, with classical music, Mason, full of joy and happiness, is going to watch Hannibal Lecter being eaten alive, until Clarice frees Hannibal from almost being fed alive by the wild boars, shooting the guards around the area. As she's helping Hannibal, Clarice got shot by one of the guards. Before that guard got shot by Margot. We're going to keep the scene of Lecter picking up the unconscious Clarice and the wild boars not going to Lecter, just going around him. They just smell evil from him. Mason, furious and angry, couldn't stand the show he was watching. He was insulting Cordell, not knowing where he is. He is not enjoying the show. That is when Lecter stared at him and says, "You promised them a good show, Mason, and you promised these hogs dinner, and so they shall get it." Margot, from behind, pushes Mason slowly into the pen. Mason, crying like a little boy, begging Margot to not let him fall. Mason fell just to be eaten by the boars, as what happened originally in Ridley Scott's film. Margot watches Mason horrified by the boars before being eaten alive. She's got a grin on her face. Revenge is a dish best served wild. Lecter picked up the wounded Clarice, and before leaving the crime scene, he looked at Margot and tells her Don't worry, my dear Margot. You can always tell them it was me. Don't put yourself through pain and hardships like your brother right now. You are now free from him. Live the life you always wanted to have. This is where we end the Verger House massacre, and we move to the ending. At the lake house, we see Krendler practicing his speech on how he captured Hannibal the cannibal and his love Clarice. He gets a call from one of his men informing him that Mason is gone, and all they found from him was his broken glasses. Lost and scared, we saw Lecter out of nowhere behind him, putting Krendler to sleep. The following night, Lecter's preparing a nice dinner. We see Krendler being injected with drugs, almost unconscious. Clarice is wearing the same black dress like she did in the original film, wounded and drugged. Lecter, being the host of the evening, was serving legs. Specifically, Krendler's right leg. Instead of his brain, make it more realistic with his leg. No need for the bad CGI. And keep the moment where Lecter feeds Krendler with his body parts. It's just horrifying and sickening. But then again, this is Dr. Hannibal Lecter we're talking about. In the middle of the conversation, Lecter stabs Krendler in the head for being rude to Clarice during dinner. And then there were two. Clarice thought it would be a good idea to attack Lecter after killing Krendler. Unsuccessfully, of course. The house gets caught on fire when the candle fell and goes to the curtains. Clarice, still drugged, is trying her best to hunt down Dr. Lecter, bring the same anxiety when she captured Buffalo Bill in Silence of the Lambs, capture the psychological aspect and the elements of horror, play with her mind. Remember, she is under drugs. We're going on a trip. She is moving around the house to find Lecter, and then she moves to the kitchen. The house is getting caught on fire. Hannibal's playing with her mind, going around shouting, "Clarice, Clarice. Let's play a game. Quid pro quo, yes or no." And this is where we lead to the hallucination. We see Clarice in the forests in the middle of the night. She sees lambs, multiple lambs, just staring at her. And the lambs continue to multiply in numbers. Horrified and scared for her life, Clarice ran from the lambs. And she is the one screaming. But she's mute. She tries to scream so bad, but no sound comes from her. And then we jump to the time where Clarice was hunting Buffalo Bill at his own house. The voice of Lecter haunting her mind, getting into her head about how she was scared in pulling the trigger, that she didn't want to fall the same mistake as her father, not saving his own life. As she was standing, we see Buffalo Bill on the ground, bleeding and trying his best to survive. Looking at her, it says, "It puts the knife on the body so it would suffer." And then out of nowhere, Lecter stabs Clarice, telling her to stay calm, it's okay. Lecter tells her that it's okay. Her pain, referencing her life, will fade away. Lecter and Clarice stare at each other before they have their final quid pro quo. Hannibal asked Clarice about the botched drug raid, which resulted in killing 5 of her colleagues, and at the same time of killing the criminal, where she was ordered to capture her alive. Clarice revealed that she did intentionally shoot the woman, not just because she was afraid of her life and to avenge her colleagues, but because she wanted to find comfort from what she was doing, to find peace with herself from the corruption of the FBI, to make them fear her after being belittled for being a woman. The day she shot Buffalo Bill, she said that she somehow enjoyed seeing him in pain and suffering, but she hated what she became, unlike Lecter, who seemed happy from what he heard. He wanted Clarice to be like that, to join him. But then Clarice asked him about Misha, capturing Lecter again in an emotional state, remembering his sister. And then out of nowhere, Clarice took out her gun and shot him in the stomach. Remember Krendler saying that he has a gun at the cottage? Yeah, that's why. Small details lead up to this. Now Clarice asks again the wounded Hannibal about Misha. She asked him if he ate her. Lecter revealed that he did eat Misha, marking the birth of his cannibalism. You see, his life was spared by the soldiers since they wanted her for survival in the harsh winter during the war. When the soldiers took Misha, Hannibal fought to save his sister until a soldier hit him in the head, knocking him out. When he woke up, his sister was gone. But what's worse, he joined them by drinking her broth due to starvation, which was why he is the way he is. It killed him as a human being and a brother. His life was gone the day he ate his sister. Now you have to realize both are miserable with who they are, symbolizing Lecter and Clarice as one person all along. Here Lecter says to Clarice, "This is beautiful, Clarice. This is all I ever wanted, for both of us." And then Clarice replies, "It's beautiful." Lecter asked Clarice to waltz with him, which she agreed, while they're wounded in the middle of the burning house. As they're dancing, the scene moves to a fantasy with them waltzing in Lecter's prison cell, with the same outfits they wore when they first met in Silence of the Lambs, symbolizing the beginning of their horror love story, with a tragic ending. The scene transitions back to the house in big flames. The cops arrive late to the crime scene, and couldn't get the job done. The house burned down. Krendler is dead. Lecter and Clarice were nowhere to be found. But the film doesn't end there. In the final scene, we see Barney reading the newspaper about the house burning down. And then he gets a knock on the door. When he opened it, no one was there. But all he found was a box with a letter that says, "To my old friend Barney." Inside the box was Dr. Lecter's trademark mask. Here we see Barney's face full of fear, and then fade to black. The story ends right there. I want the audience to think about the ending, giving them curiosity. Questions come to mind. Did Clarice and Hannibal escape the fire together? Did they become a couple? Did Lecter survive the fire but Clarice didn't? What does this mean for Barney? Uncertainty at its best. And there you have it, my version of Hannibal. We fixed a couple of things. We added Margot into the story. We made Mason Verger a much hated character. We got to know more of Hannibal's human side with his secret about his sister Misha. We improved the ending of the film to be more tragic, poetic, and uncertain. And last but not least, we have Clarice to be played by Tilda Swinton. And this marks the end of this episode, fixing Ridley Scott's Hannibal. You like my version of the film? Great. If not, then let us know what could have been done better. I don't know when is my next episode about fixing and rewriting the story, but this won't be the last film to talk about. Thank you so much for tuning in and listening. Make sure to check out our previous episodes available on Anchor, Spotify, Apple, and all podcast platforms. And we will see you next time on Films Unchained Podcast, the place of breakdowns, movie analysis, and film talks.